Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump confirming that tariffs for Mexico and Canada will begin tomorrow. Plus, the president's latest comments on Ukraine and a major investment from a Taiwanese chip company, Nat'l, at the White House. Taiwan chipmaker TSMC will invest $100 billion in the U.S. What this means for national security and American manufacturing, Jack Bradley reports. The Senate voting on whether to confirm former wrestling executive Linda McMahon as the nation's education chief. The role would place her atop a department that President Trump has vowed to dismantle. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. And wildfires are spreading rapidly across the Carolinas, fueled by strong winds and forcing thousands to evacuate. While some of the hardest hit areas are still recovering from past disasters. Christina Corona has the details.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump unwavering in pushing for a quick end to the Ukraine war. He's also following through on his promise to ramp up tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China starting tomorrow. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What did the president say at today's event announcing foreign chip investments?
Good evening to you as well, Tips. At today's investment announcement event, President Trump doubled down on his criticism of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy while reiterating that he wants the war in Ukraine to end quickly. And this, of course, comes after the two had a contentious meeting last Friday where Zelenskyy had to leave the White House early without any deals. Here's what President Trump said today. Watch.
What do you need to see from President Zelenskyy to restart these negotiations?
Well, I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. But he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
And that you have President Trump pushing back against Zelenskyy's Sunday comment that he thinks the war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine will not end anytime soon. And President Trump this morning in a Truth Social post calls that comment a worst statement that Zelenskyy can make at this moment, adding that he believes Zelenskyy does not want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing. And during this event this afternoon, President Trump added that he thinks both Russia and the people of Ukraine want a peace deal that could happen very soon. But if Zelenskyy doesn't want it, he says he might not be around for very long. And top Republicans are saying that they're trying to push both sides to come to an agreement again soon over the minerals deal between Ukraine and the U.S. Meanwhile, President Trump today also announced more actions on tariffs. He says he's firm on imposing tariffs on both Mexico and Canada starting on Tuesday, and that he's also ramping up his tariffs on China from 10% to 20%. This afternoon, he just signed the order to make that official. And during the event today, he was also saying that that is to punish these countries for allowing fentanyl to be flown into the U.S., as well as to punish China for its unfair trade practices. Watch.
It's going to be very costly for people to take advantage of this country. They can't come in and steal our money and steal our jobs and take our factories and take our businesses and expect not to be punished. And they're being punished by tariffs.
And the Trump administration is also pushing both Mexico and Canada to match the U.S.'s tariffs on China. Back to you.
And Iris, President Trump will give a major speech to a joint session of Congress tomorrow. What do we know about it?
Sure. So this will be President Trump's first address to this joint session of Congress in his second term, and this will be a big deal, according to the Trump White House. The White House confirmed to us that the theme of his speech tomorrow night at 9 p.m. will be the renewal of the American dream. And that also has several parts, including talking about his accomplishments from his second term thus far at home and abroad, as well as what the administration has done for the economy. He's also going to push for Congress to pass additional funding for border security, as well as lays out his plan for peace around the globe. And President Trump himself onto social said that this will be a big speech. He will tell it like it is. And Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told us at the White House today that this will be must-see TV. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. The TSMC investment will increase domestic chip production and reduce the U.S.'s reliance on Asia-made chips. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley breaks down how this boosts national security.
The most powerful AI chips in the world will be made right here in America.
President Trump saying Taiwan's semiconductor company TSMC's $100 billion investment in the U.S. is a boost to national security.
This is a tremendous move by the most powerful company in the world. It's a matter of economic security. It's also a matter of national security for us.
TSMC is the world's largest producer of semiconductor chips. Semiconductors are used to make everything from smartphones to AI to missiles and tanks. And they're now one of the largest drivers of economies and military power. Now, this $100 billion investment is making more chip factories in Arizona. And TSMC has already invested $65 billion to this effort previously. Now, one reason to incentivize building in the U.S. is to avoid tariffs. But another is that the U.S. is trying to find alternatives to China's rare earth minerals. These rare earths are needed to make chips, and China has most of these minerals, about 90%. And the Chinese Communist Party has long been a threat to Taiwan's sovereignty. China's military has been more aggressive in the waters around Taiwan, whether it's conducting military exercises near Taiwan, ramming Philippine Coast Guard vessels, or most recently, China allegedly cutting an undersea cable belonging to Taiwan. And when asked on Tuesday about a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, Trump said,
"This would certainly, I can't say minimize, that would be a catastrophic event, obviously, but it will at least give us a position where we have, in this very, very important business, we would have a very big part of it in the United States. So it would have a big impact if something should happen with Taiwan."
Restrictions on China's semiconductor manufacturing goes back to the Biden administration. Now, last year, the U.S. restricted the sale of semiconductor making equipment to China. That's as Chinese buyers may now be circumventing these export controls. Recent reports found NVIDIA chips could be making their way to China. Additionally, the U.S. State Department earlier this month removed a line from its website that said that the U.S. does not support Taiwan's independence, showing a change in tone about the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Department of Health and Department of Defense will be requiring staff to reply to an email requesting a list of 5 accomplishments from the previous week. Also, protests against Elon Musk happened over the weekend, resulting in 9 arrests. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
The Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Defense are 2 of the latest agencies to take action in the ongoing situation regarding an email sent out about 2 weeks ago by the Office of Personnel Management, asking all federal employees to reply with 5 things that they accomplished the previous week. This email was heavily promoted by Elon Musk, and initially some agencies told their employees to hold off while some told their employees to go ahead and reply. And the HHS and DOD explicitly told their employees recently that they do indeed want them to reply. Now, according to an email sent to their staff, the HHS seems to be implying that this is going to be an ongoing thing from now on moving forward, and they want an email every Monday by 11:59 p.m. listing the things that they accomplished the previous week. Now, the Department of Defense said that they made their decision after an initial review.
I am now directing each member of the department's civilian workforce, just civilian, to provide those 5 bullets. It's a simple task. Really, as Elon said, as the president recognized in our first cabinet meeting, just a pulse check.
As Secretary Hegseth said that this only applies to civilian employees, and the DOD are actually one of the agencies that initially told their employees to hold off, and for them it was due to dealing with classified and sensitive information. However, the HHS are one of the agencies that initially told their employees to go ahead and respond, and they seem to be confirming this with this latest communication to their staff. And over the weekend, there were various protests at numerous Tesla dealerships in LA, New York City, Jacksonville, as well as some other cities. They were protesting against Elon Musk and his role in the radical reduction in federal workforce under the Trump administration. Police said in New York City there were hundreds of protests, and they made 9 arrests on Sunday outside of the Tesla dealership. The police said that this is one of the first in a wave of takedown Tesla protests. Organizers wrote online, quote, "We are taking action at Tesla, Musk's flagship company, and calling for people to drop their Tesla stocks and join the picket lines." Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up tomorrow night, President Trump is slated to address a joint session of Congress at 9 p.m. Eastern. How would everyday Americans rate his performance so far? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
What are some of your expectations for President Trump's speech tomorrow?
Well, I hope it's a very uplifting speech. He's got some great ideas and puts it in the right words in the right context. I don't see how he can't get both chambers to agree to some, if not most, of what he can say.
I expect him to tell us what kind of progress he's making.
I expect him to act the same as he always does. Hopefully he tries to mend some fences.
He's kind of pretty open-minded, says what he wants to say, and speaks his mind, so not going to be surprised by anything.
Well, I hope that he's a reformer. I like what he's doing, but he's going a little too fast, and I hope he's a little more careful with what he cuts.
How would you rate President Trump's performance so far?
Best of my lifetime for certain. The only one that's ever gotten anything done at all.
Fast, confusing sometimes, yeah. Some changes are hard for others to accept until they see more positivity out of it.
Leadership poor. He has good ideas. He just needs to learn how to conduct himself as a professional.
B-. I'm at heart a Democrat. I wish I could have voted Democrat, so I voted for change. But, I'm afraid the change is a little bit too fast and a little bit too reckless.
He's going hard and fast, you know what I mean? And maybe he needs to dial it back a little bit, but he only has a certain amount of time to get things right.
Right now, we are hearing from some Democrats saying that they're going to boycott the speech by not attending. So do you think everybody should be there?
No, they don't have to come. They can do whatever they want.
Everybody should be there. He's the President of the United States.
You got to be there to have your voice heard, to show some solidarity. I mean, we're all one country, so Democrats and Republicans, independents, we all need to be there.
Not being there doesn't help fix the situation. It's dialogue that helps fix the situation. It's talking it over, and it's really researching and making sure you know what your points are, and that's what I want him to do.
Keep in mind, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, some of the people who voted for you don't agree with you, but the people want to see the people we elect represent them, and this is the opportunity for them to do it.
And NTD will have special coverage of President Trump's address tomorrow night. Tune in starting at 7 p.m. Eastern on March 4th for on-the-ground coverage, analysis, and more on the president's vision for the country. Dozens of wildfires raged through North and South Carolina on Sunday, forcing thousands to evacuate. One area still recovering from Hurricane Helene is now being impacted by the flames. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Wildfires continue to rage across South Carolina, with 175 fires burning over 4,200 acres statewide on Sunday. On Sunday, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster declared a state of emergency as fires swept through the Carolinas and Georgia, threatening homes and forcing evacuations. By Monday afternoon, the South Carolina Forestry Commission reported that the number of active fires had decreased to 5 across the state, including 1 in Myrtle Beach, 2 in Williamsburg County, and 1 in Beaufort County. The largest, the Covington Lane fire near Myrtle Beach, spread rapidly, consuming 1,600 acres, and was only 30% contained by Sunday night. In Horry County, evacuations were ordered for 8 neighborhoods as National Guard Black Hawk helicopters dropped water on the flames. Thick smoke created hazardous conditions Monday morning, reducing visibility in the Carolina forest area and prompting road closures. But the National Weather Service expects conditions to improve as a cold front moves in, bringing much-needed rain by Tuesday. In North Carolina, one area affected by the fires is Polk County, which is still recovering from the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene.
This county, this area that hit is one of the hardest hit by Helene. The whole county was hit, but this area that we're in, where this fire up here, was was one of the worst areas impacted by Helene. So they're still in the midst of cleaning up. We still have damage to structures. We still have people trying to get their lives back together. Now we have this. So it's heartbreaking for us as emergency responders for these folks. It's still trying to get their lives back together.
A wildfire in the Blue Ridge Mountains threatened the communities of Saluda and Tryon near the South Carolina border. The U.S. Forest Service's National Forests in North Carolina issued a warning on Facebook stating, "The combination of dry fuels, limited rainfall, and very low humidity will lead to an elevated risk of adverse fire behavior today. People are urged to avoid outdoor burning today. Careless debris burning remains the leading cause of wildfires." According to a state forestry website, 4 active fires remained in North Carolina as of early Monday. Meanwhile, in Georgia, wildfires spread across Georgia over the weekend, with the Georgia Forestry Commission responding to 137 fires on Saturday. Officials report that the blazes burned around 2,400 acres statewide. There have been no reports of injuries or structural damages at this time. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, for her second solo public appearance, the First Lady of the U.S. joined a roundtable today. She spoke alongside lawmakers and victims of deepfake pornography to shame the abuse. David Lamb has the highlights from the event after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Earlier, we sat down with Ryan Bangert, Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives and Special Counsel to the President at Alliance Defending Freedom, about the executive actions President Trump has taken to address what he called a weaponized government and legal system. We also discussed the ADF's key upcoming cases going before the Supreme Court. Take a look.
Ryan Bangert, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, we're seeing a lot of changes under this second Trump administration. I want to talk to you, though, about the executive orders specifically targeting the weaponization of the legal system. Talk to us about what we're seeing there. I know you're quite involved with that, too. So talk to us about what you're seeing here.
Well, weaponization of the law has been a real problem over the last 4 years, and we've seen it across the board. Look at the FACE Act. It's a law that was really meant to protect both churches, but also abortion clinics. And it was weaponized by the Biden administration against peaceful, pro-life activists who were simply praying and engaging in peaceful protest. Several of them received prison sentences for protesting abortion clinics. And so many of them were pardoned by President Trump right off the bat. But we have seen a real problem in this area with the government, the power of the government being used to silence speech of those with whom the government disagrees. Take, for example, what happened during COVID. The White House leaned on social media companies during the COVID pandemic to take down posts that were critical of the White House's policies concerning masks and lockdowns. Take, for example, what the Treasury Department did after January 6th, when it ordered financial institutions to begin surveilling people who were engaging in transactions with political enemies of the Biden administration. Oh, by the way, they identified ADF as one of those organizations and said that the financial institutions had to monitor transactions with ADF as well, which was just bizarre. And so the weaponization of government is a real problem. Now, thankfully, the Trump administration issued an executive order saying we are going to put an end to all of that nonsense. And that is a great start. But it's not the end of the story, because we're still seeing blue states that at the state level engaging in lawfare against conservatives. An example of that is the state of New Jersey. The Attorney General in the state of New Jersey has been pursuing First Choice Pregnancy Resource Center through the consumer protection laws of the state, basically asking for them to turn over records of their donors, turn over 10 years of internal memoranda and emails. And why? Because the Attorney General doesn't like the fact that the Pregnancy Resource Centers, pro-life PRCs, aren't referring women out for abortions. So ADF represents First Choice, and we are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to hear their case.
A lot of very important developments, as you mentioned, but it doesn't end with just these 4 years, as you're pointing out. When you mentioned COVID, too, we saw with the truckers in Canada, it's not just a U.S. issue. I know you have some cases that are going up in front of the Supreme Court that don't just impact the U.S. I think Vice President J.D. Vance was actually mentioning one of your cases. So talk to us about that aspect.
Yes, we're having a very busy time this term before the U.S. Supreme Court. We have 2 arguments alone in the month of April. The first argument arises out of the state of South Carolina. The South Carolina government decided it wasn't going to send taxpayer dollars through the Medicaid system to abortion providers. And they were sued. The government was sued by Planned Parenthood, who else, arguing that Planned Parenthood should be given access to this money, notwithstanding the government's decision. So ADF is representing the state in that case, and we are going to be arguing at the U.S. Supreme Court on their behalf to exclude Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers from their Medicaid system. So that's on April 2nd. That's a government funding case that directly impacts how taxpayer dollars are used. The second case on April 30th we'll be arguing is on behalf of the Oklahoma State Charter School Board. And this is a body that controls which schools are given access to the state charter school system. And they allowed a school called St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual Charter School to become a charter school in the Oklahoma charter school system, and which made perfect sense. It was going to provide education and resources in a virtual environment to children who needed to access those kinds of services. But they were sued, the board was sued, and challenged on that decision on grounds that St. Isidore of Seville is a religious school, and the charter school system should not be open to religious schools. And the Oklahoma courts affirmed that sentiment and said, that's right, we can't have religious charter schools in the Oklahoma system. So we're going to be arguing that case before the U.S. Supreme Court at the end of April, arguing that simply having a religious affiliation and a religious belief system does not disqualify you from accessing these otherwise available government programs.
I want to dig into that a bit because obviously right now a lot of conversations about school choice. You mentioned Oklahoma. We saw with the pandemic a rise in homeschooling. I think those numbers rose about 200%. And then also something called classical education, right? Learning from the founding fathers. Now, speaking of the founding fathers, when it comes to what built this nation, there is a lot of inspiration from the Bible, that aspect. But right now you're having this controversy, if you will, around having the 10 Commandments in schools, right? Critics are saying this is violating the separation of church and state. How are you viewing that from both a faith and a legal lens?
Yes. Well, and there are several bills that are running right now in state legislatures that would put the 10 Commandments back in public schools. And I think what you're seeing, though, is all throughout public schools here in the United States, there's finally coming a pushback to what has been for years and just a sort of a open discrimination against people of faith and an open pushing of propaganda, open pushing of ideas that are harmful, positively harmful to kids. A great example of that is what's been taking place with so-called secret social transitions. All across the country, ADF has cases in several states right now where schools have passed policies that require teachers, if they encounter a student, a child, who is struggling with their gender identity and is asking the school to help them so-called transition within the school by using restrooms inconsistent with their sex or dressed differently, the teachers aren't allowed to tell the parents about that unless the student gives permission. And the teachers are being required to use whatever language, pronouns the student requests, even if the teacher has a deeply held religious belief that runs contrary to that. So all throughout the school systems, we have seen policies like this put in place, and we've challenged those under the First Amendment, arguing that teachers have a First Amendment right not to lie to parents about what's happening with their children's mental health care at a school. We also have been challenging those under parental rights theories, that parents have a right to know what's happening with their kids in public schools. And I'm happy to say that President Trump has put in place a number of executive orders calling K-12 schools out for their open-ended propagandizing of students and teachers and parents in the public school system. And recently, he also pointed out in another executive order that the redefinition of sex in Title IX that was attempted by and put in place by the Biden administration, that's no longer the policy of the United States government. So these are very positive developments, but I think the public school system, the K-12 in particular, is going to continue to be a real battlefront in this war over ideas that we're seeing play out all across the country.
Speaking of that war over ideas, if we kind of zoom out a bit, it almost seems like there's a bigger battle happening with the very values and foundations of what made this country. When you look at a more Marxist lens of really tearing this nation apart from within, one of the main things is separating children from their families, from their parents, having, the teachers have the say. And you have certain people put in place where Communist China has, say, sister city agreements or the Confucius Institutes. That sounds very great on the surface. Like, yes, let's exchange cultures and things. But Beijing picks those professors and what topics they can and can't talk about. And they start influencing the local politics. We've seen that in several states. You had the recent case of Linda Sun, the aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, literally making sure Taiwanese officials weren't able to get a meeting with Hochul, or having the CCP on the phone during secret state meetings about COVID, all of that influence. So when it comes to maybe the soul of the nation, what's at stake here, how do we go about battling something like Communist China that's using our own rules against us? You saw that with TikTok, where they're arguing First Amendment. Of course, the Supreme Court has stepped in, but how do you counter something like that?
I just came back from London, England last week. I was at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Conference. And Os Guinness, a great thinker and a great man, put it to the conference attendees this way. We're at a civilizational moment, and we have to decide as the West whether or not we're going to re-embrace the animating principles that defined our culture and our civilization for centuries. And what are those principles? What are those animating ideas? Well, they arise from the Judeo-Christian belief system. They are inherently focused on the dignity of man as a creature of God. All men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence. Well, that cannot arise. Those words cannot be spoken by political leaders unless they are steeped in the Judeo-Christian concept of man as being created in the image of God. The U.S. Constitution, the separation of powers. These ideas are deeply rooted in the concept that man is fallible, that human beings are at our heart, we have a sin nature, and we have to be checked. We cannot give human beings unlimited power to make decisions. We have to check the inherent vices that all of us have. We have to make sure that we're accountable and we're limited. We're accountable to the law. No man is above the law, right? Lex Rex, the law is king. Here in the United States, we have to get back to these fundamental principles. And these principles are ultimately grounded, as Os Guinness pointed out at the ARC conference, in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Well, Ryan Bangert, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Government funding expires in less than 2 weeks, and lawmakers have not yet reached an agreement to avoid a shutdown. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on what's happening.
We're missing something big, which is the usurpation of Congress's power by the president, by the executive, and the framers divided power between the Congress and the president for a reason.
Democratic lawmakers are threatening Republicans to force a government shutdown if the Trump administration continues what they call the unconstitutional withholding of congressionally approved funds.
Well, it's a dereliction of our duty. I don't understand why Chairman Comer doesn't just call Elon Musk to explain what he's doing. I mean, why doesn't he come to Congress and explain that? Explain to the American people. Instead, what's happening is people are being laid off. They're not being consulted, and we're putting the country at risk for an awful event.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has suggested that the spending cuts found by the Department of Government Efficiency can be codified in next year's budget, while not all House Republicans agree with them.
We're looking to pass a clean CR to freeze funding at current levels to make sure that the government can stay open while we begin to incorporate all these savings that we're finding through the DOGE effort and these other sources of revenue that President Trump's policies are bringing to the table.
Well, I think that we certainly want to consider a lot of the savings that have been identified by Elon Musk and the DOGE within reason, right? Because some of these things we are questioning and we're not 100% supportive of. But with the idea of DOGE was to give recommendations to Congress on where we can save taxpayer money.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has distanced himself from the negotiations, while some House Democrats outright reject the proposals.
Speaker Johnson and myself had not had a conversation about the appropriations bills because those conversations at the moment are being led by Rosa DeLauro on the Democratic side and Tom Cole on the Republican side.
So what the Elon Musk-led effort in this White House is attempting to do is to throw out a couple of anecdotes that may or may not have a basis in accuracy to distract from the fact just this past week, House Republicans passed a budget that cuts $880 billion from Medicaid.
Government funding expires on March 14th. It's also worth noting that the Senate voted Monday afternoon to confirm Linda McMahon to be the next Secretary of Education. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
First Lady Melania Trump was on Capitol Hill to express support for victims of AI-generated pornography. Both parties in Congress are behind the Take It Down Act, which targets non-consensual sharing of explicit images. NTD's David Lamb reports.
First Lady Melania Trump expressed her support for the Take It Down Act in hopes of getting it through the Republican-controlled House and to President Trump's desk to become law.
I'm here with you today with a common goal: to protect our youth from online harm. The widespread presence of abusive behavior in the digital domain affects the daily lives of our children, families, and communities.
This was Melania Trump's first solo public appearance since she resumed the role of First Lady on January 20th. The Take It Down Act boosts protections for victims of non-consensual sharing of explicit images. This includes content generated by artificial intelligence, also known as deepfake pornography. Senator Ted Cruz introduced the bill last year.
Disturbingly, many of these victims are teenagers at American high schools who are facing a surge in AI-generated sexual images. Hundreds of teens, often targeted by their own classmates, are enduring senseless psychological harm, knowing that these fake images exist and they're still out there. And in many cases, there's no recourse for these teenage victims.
The legislation would require social media companies to swiftly remove the content within 48 hours if notified by a victim. Under the bill, violators could be charged with a felony and imprisoned for up to 3 years.
Now our messages to the bullies, to the perverts, to the predators: if you dare to do this to another innocent child, you are going to go to prison. You will serve jail time.
Representative Maria Elvira Salazar said the bill's goal is to prevent cyber abuse, online bullying, and suicides. Victims also spoke about their teenage experience as victims of deepfake imagery and the challenges they faced in getting support.
Pictures from a past Instagram photo with a nude body and my face attached, made from AI. Fear, shock, and disgust were just some of the many emotions I felt.
When I asked my school why they weren't using the Code of Conduct or HIP policies, their response: they need to be updated to include AI.
The bill has passed the Senate but has yet to get a House vote. David Lamb, NTD News.
Coming up, Israel starts blocking humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, demanding that Hamas releases the remaining hostages. Meanwhile, chaos erupts at the Israeli parliament when grieving families are denied entry. Jason Perry reports. And British Prime Minister Starmer said a U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal is not enough to act as a security guarantee. He reaffirmed Britain is willing to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, but said such a move needs U.S. backing. Malcolm Hudson brings us the latest from London after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Israeli government has begun blocking humanitarian aid from entering the Gaza Strip as it continues to call on Hamas to release the hostages. Meanwhile, chaos erupted at the Israeli parliament today when families of those killed during the October 7th attacks were barred from entry. NTD's Jason Perry brings us the latest.
Emotions ran high at the Israeli parliament on Monday as guards were seen trying to pin down a man wearing a T-shirt with what appeared to be a picture of a hostage on it. The Israeli parliament was holding a session about an official state inquiry into the failures during the October 7th terrorist attack. And families of those killed during that attack were initially not allowed to attend. Israeli media said one man whose son was killed fainted and required medical attention. A spokesperson for the Knesset said too many people had attempted to enter the observation area, but the families were eventually allowed into the observers gallery. Israel's prime minister then gave a warning to the Hamas terrorist group in the Gaza Strip.
I say to Hamas, if you don't release our hostages, there will be consequences you can't imagine.
Israel's defense minister also gave a stern warning to Hamas on Monday.
If Hamas does not release the hostages soon, the gates of Gaza will be locked and the gates of hell will open.
And Israel did close the gates of Gaza. On Sunday, Israel started blocking humanitarian aid from getting into the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said they began blocking aid from getting into Gaza because Hamas rejected the U.S. proposed ceasefire. Israel's government spokesperson David Mencer said Hamas systematically takes the humanitarian aid and sells it to support their own terrorist activity.
For years, concrete intended for homes was used to build terror tunnels. Fuel meant for ambulances was used in pickup trucks and motorbikes that broke into Israel and carried our kidnapped women and children into Gaza. Medicines have been used to drug our own hostages. The sworn goal of Hamas is to kill every Jew on earth. And so what? You want Israel to pay for their petrol, to make them sandwiches as well?
Meanwhile, a resident in the Gaza Strip shared his thoughts.
We fear the people will starve due to the lack of aid and food supplies. Additionally, people are afraid of the return of war and facing death again.
And in Israel, a 60-year-old Arab Israeli stabbed multiple people on Monday, injuring at least 4 in what police are calling a terrorist attack. Security guards shot and killed the attacker. Shortly afterwards, the Hamas terrorist group praised the attack, but did not claim responsibility. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Britain's prime minister said the prospective U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal is not enough to act as a security guarantee. This as he reaffirmed Britain's commitment to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, but he added that such a move would need to be backed by the U.S. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said a minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine is not enough of a security guarantee on its own. This following a heated dispute between Trump and Zelenskyy that scuppered the deal. Despite this, Starmer said Trump's commitment to peace is sincere.
This week has shown with total clarity that the US is vital in securing the peace we all want to see in Ukraine.
Starmer said a security guarantee for Ukraine should be led by Europe but needs US backing. He cautioned against accepting a weak deal. Zelenskyy told reporters at the weekend that he is prepared to stand down in exchange for NATO membership and suggested he is ready to sign the minerals deal with the US. Starmer said Britain needs to lead from the front with the European coalition of the willing.
Britain will play a leading role with, if necessary, and together with others, boots on the ground and planes in the air. Mr. Speaker, it is right that Europe do the heavy lifting to support peace on our continent.
Starmer's statement comes after he gathered leaders from Europe and Canada for talks in London over the weekend. France has suggested a 1-month truce with Russia, which would cover air, sea and attacks on critical infrastructure. The director of leading policy think tank Chatham House said there are issues with this proposal.
I think a 1-month ceasefire does have some problems. The Ukrainians are the first to point this out and say, look, what we don't want is to give Russia a month off to regroup, to get its drones together, to get more soldiers ready for the front line.
British Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard said various ceasefire options are on the table, but insisted no plan, including the French plan, has been agreed. But Pollard appeared to signal that military deployments to Ukraine from European countries would be possible even without the US backing. Starmer over the weekend announced a roughly $2 billion finance deal for Ukraine. Thales missile factory will supply 5,000 air defense missiles to Ukraine. European shares soared in value on Monday morning as defense stocks received a boost amid broader prospects of higher military spending. British Defence Secretary John Healey is expected to travel to the US this week to meet his counterpart, Pete Hegseth, to continue talks on Ukraine. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Back in the States, the Queens Village Republican Club, the oldest Republican club in the nation, marked a historic milestone, its 150th anniversary, at its annual Lincoln Dinner in Queens, New York. NTD's Chris Bobb has more from the event.
The Lincoln Dinner hosted 330 guests for an evening of awards, dining, and dancing. Janice Trey, CEO of the Epoch Times, was born and raised in a communist labor camp where her parents had been sentenced during China's Cultural Revolution. She told guests that she could have died during that period, or during the Tiananmen Square massacre, or the persecution of Falun Gong.
I am determined to give a voice to all the voiceless and bring religious freedoms to all.
Trey mentioned that the Epoch Times was one of the first media outlets to report on the COVID-19 pandemic back in December of 2019.
Our subscribers who were traveling in China changed their return tickets to earlier dates and they avoided the lockdown. Unfortunately, their colleagues and relatives who did not change the return flights, many of those never make it back because they die of COVID in China. So timely information saves lives.
The keynote address was delivered by former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who warned about China's threats and the need for new U.S. alliances.
Epoch Times is the best insight that you will get into China and into this country. And here's why you have to get an insight into China. This is unfortunately too similar to the 1930s when Hitler was telling us you can take over the world. And Chamberlain sat back and said, oh, a nation has very few good friends, just like a person. Maybe we have 2 or 3. Israel and the United States. United States and Japan. You know how afraid a lot of China is of Japan? Rearm them! South Korea. Taiwan. Maybe India. Maybe not. I think so. Eastern Europe. Poland. For sure. Lithuania. We put together an alliance like that and we'll overwhelm China. And we won't have to worry.
The full Lincoln Dinner video is available at ntd.com and on our YouTube channel. Chris Bobb, NTD News, New York.
Coming up in the NHL, after scoring over the weekend, Alex Ovechkin is just 10 goals away from tying Wayne Gretzky. Dave Martin joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today in sports, but let's start in college athletics as the ACC has reportedly reached a proposed settlement with Florida State and Clemson that will change the way the league distributes revenue. How would this agreement work?
Well, instead of like an evenly shared distribution, which was what they've done in the past, this would be more based on which schools generate the most TV interest. Now, they would get higher payouts, reportedly as much as $15 million per year. Of course, that means other schools would get less too for that to happen. But keeping the top teams happy means keeping the conference together. And Florida State and Clemson are really 2 of their flagship schools, because they're really good at football. Now, last year, the ACC also decided to financially award teams that make the college football playoff and NCAA basketball tournament instead of sharing that revenue with the rest of the conference as well. So those 2 changes together, could bridge the growing financial gap between those ACC schools and the SEC and Big Ten schools, which is really what these lawsuits were about in the first place.
Well, looking at hockey news, Alex Ovechkin scored another goal over the weekend, his 31st of the season. Now for his career, he's now just 10 away from tying Wayne Gretzky's record. How soon could he pass him?
Maybe about a month or so. This is really an incredible story. His 31 goals are the 5th most in the league, and he's done in just 44 games this year because of injuries. That's an incredible pace for anyone. Even more amazing considering he's 39 years old. Last year he scored 31 goals as well, but that was in 79 games. And between that and him getting shut out of the playoffs, I think a lot of us were wondering if, age was finally starting to catch up with him. Clearly it hasn't. But here's how it plays out at the end. 22 games are left. He's got 10 more goals to tie Gretzky, 11 to pass him. So that's 1 every 2 games. But he's been averaging 3 every 4 games. So if he can do that, it looks like in about 1 month's time, he should pass him. It'll be early April. Meanwhile, his Capitals, they are in action tonight. They face the Ottawa Senators.
Moving to NBA news, Phoenix Suns star Kevin Durant said the team, quote, embarrassed ourselves yesterday after a loss to Minnesota. What was he referring to?
I think it was a combination of losing big at home. I think it was 18 points after they had the lead at halftime. Plus, this was their 11th loss in their last 14 games. They're really struggling right now. In fact, if the playoffs started today, they wouldn't even make it into the play-in round to determine the final 2 seeds. And this is a team that had championship hopes before the season started. I mean, not only do they have Durant, who's a former MVP, they've got All-Stars Bradley Beal and Devin Booker as well. I mean, personally, I felt they went off track like a year and a half ago when they traded away Chris Paul. He's such a good distributor. They have too many good shooters to not have a distributor, giving the ball to them. In any case, they've got 21 games left this year to make a run, so anything's possible, but time is certainly running close.
Shifting gears to college basketball, 2 of the top 3 ranked teams are in action tonight as number 2 Duke hosts Wake Forest, while your unranked Kansas Jayhawks play at 3rd-ranked Houston.
Yeah, KU was actually number 1 to start the season a while ago. It's been downhill ever since for them, unfortunately. The Cougars, meanwhile, they've already clinched the Big 12 title. Now, these 2 met earlier in the year in Kansas, and Houston somehow won in double overtime. I say somehow because KU actually led by 6 with 10 seconds left in the first overtime. Somehow ended up losing that game. I don't quite understand it. Anyway, Duke as well, they are very hot. They've won 22 of their last 23. They're 17-1 in the ACC. A win tonight over Wake Forest would clinch them a share of the ACC title, and they are 19.5-point favorites to win. So that game's at the top of the hour. Meanwhile, Kansas versus Houston 2 hours later at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.